Well, hello and welcome, awesome students, as we begin to work into week 4. And as we conclude this week, we are at the official halfway point, right? Half the class will be over. And so time flies when you're having fun, right? I bring this up and share this because things move very quickly. And before you know it, we're going to be in the last week. So make sure that you're on top of things moving forward. And if you're behind, as a few students are still finishing up some of the assignments from week 3, make sure that you get this complete as soon as possible. Certainly in your best interest to always be proactive and working ahead. I cannot stress this enough as you progress into the program. You know, some of those 400 level classes are a bit more challenging and will take more time. And certainly as you move into graduate school, that is going to be the case as well. You're going to be spending a lot of hours doing research and going on very deep on some of these topics and some of the things that you're going to have to do in terms of assignment completion. So moving forward, I am starting the process of working through the grading for this past week. As you can imagine, projects take a little bit more time and energy, so please be patient in terms of this process. And again, can't stress enough to get everybody submitted as quickly as possible so I can work through grading, because certainly you want this feedback moving forward. As we move forward into some of the things that we'll be talking about this week as we get into ethics and clinical intakes, we are going to be building again upon some of the things we discussed earlier in the course in terms of ethics, and now we're going to look at how we're going to start applying this into clinical practice, starting with some of the most important things, and that's the clinical intake. Now, the background I chose here was somewhat intentional in terms of balance. And a lot of what we do in terms of working with clients is about balance. A lot of what you do as a student is about finding balance. Finding balance is certainly talked about within the core principles of the department, as we want to think in terms of self-care and taking care of ourselves. So make sure that you're finding balance in your own life. And again, I can't stress enough to find those bite-sized pieces of time throughout the week to work on your submissions. You're going to find that this is a whole lot easier if you're just taking little bite-sized pieces of your workload over the course of the week, as opposed to waiting till Sunday evening at 6 p.m. to sit down, open up your coursework and see what it is that you have to complete before midnight. So let me dive in and talk about the submissions for this week coming up. As we get into module 4, we are certainly going to talk about more in depth in terms of the APA Code of Ethics. These are some things that you are going to abide by as a practitioner, regardless of the path you choose. The ethical guidelines of the APA are very similar, very much in alignment with master level practitioners, different organizations in terms of social work or MFTs or whatever designation that you might have in terms of mental health. Certainly the APA Code of Ethics is going to be out there and will mirror a lot of things that you're going to see in other ethics codes. So for some of you thinking, well, I'm going to be a master's level practitioner and the MFTs have a different set of rules, that is true to some extent, but you're going to find that the principles of the APA Code of Ethics are pretty much ingrained in most every ethics code out there. We're going to describe common components of the intake process, and these are two of the key things that we're going to talk about this week in terms of developing pathology, identifying an appropriate treatment plan, and moving forward. We take into consideration the ethics code always in everything we do, but we're going to apply some of these things related to the intake form and also talk about some of the important elements of doing a proper intake. So let's move forward, talk about the readings for this week. And as always, I cannot stress this enough, gang, start with the readings. Okay, find those little pockets of time, Monday, Tuesday this week. Find it a place where you can sit down for 30 minutes and read through a few pages of the chapter that you have due this week, roughly 20 pages. By the way, statistically, the average college student can consume about 20 pages of content in about an hour. So this is about an hour's worth of reading here. There are 2 other articles that you're going to want to address. And let me first talk about the textbook this week. And when you access the textbook, make sure and go through the important information that you want to cover, obviously. But there is one more piece that I would encourage you to do. Just go a few pages far in terms of your reading this week and take a look at the Case Illustrated, an integrated approach in working with STAN. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is going to help you, give you a little bit of foundational information when you're completing that assignment on the intake this week. And so again, spend a little extra time taking a look at this article, and that's going to help line up that submission this week. In relation to the articles this week, I want to point out a couple of things and make sure and clarify to students that you're working down a path that is going to support your success. When we have reading assignments in the class, when you click on this link right here, it is going to bring up this page. And this is actually an article that was brought out from EBSCOhost. EBSCOhost is a database that houses a lot of articles from the APA and a lot of different journals and so forth. But when you get to this page, you're going to find that there's not a whole lot of information here. This is not the extent of your reading. Please don't think for a minute that you're just going to read this abstract right here and have all the knowledge of the article. You want to actually go to the top and select if you want to look at it as a PDF or an online text. I personally always choose the PDF version. This is exactly how it would appear in the journal article. You can see how it's laid out, read through the key information here. And if you don't have this, if you don't have a printer now, you might want to consider buying an inexpensive printer to help you. Sometimes you might want to print some of these articles where you'll have an opportunity to read through some of this information and make some highlights and some notes in the margin. It's exactly what I and many colleagues have done all throughout our graduate school trainings. I would find often that I would attend class with 3 or 4 articles with some highlighted information and notes in the margin. And so just a way to help you, for those of you who like to open and hold an actual book. It's a great tip, and you can pick up printers for 40, 50 bucks. That will help you out tremendously throughout your college career. So make sure, whatever it is that, whatever way you choose to do, make sure that you're reading this full article. This is going to give you some good information in regards to pulling together different modalities in order to treat patients. This second article I thought was very interesting when it talks about the use of chat in helping clients, or the use of chat bots, where some of the help might be automated as we get into this era where AI becomes more and more important. Think about it for yourself. If you are experiencing extreme mental distress and you reach out to a therapist to help you, how might you feel if you learn that the person helping you is really just a chatbot that's giving you some pre-directed or pre-written information, or just some information that's available from AI, for example? And so these are some things that we want to consider within our industry. Again, read through the entirety of this article. This is not only going to help you, give you a richer understanding of the topic, but it is going to help you get on track in terms of developing that intake and talking about some of these ethical considerations when you're doing your journal submission this week, which I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. So again, this is a great example of an article that will help you in developing that journal submission, talking about some of the ethical considerations that you're going to want to address. So let's talk about the submissions this week. I first want to point out, as some of you I'm sure already are keenly aware of, there is no discussion board this week. Yay. Well, that might be a yay or a boo, right? Depending on how you look at things. I know Sometimes students find discussion posts to be a little bit of a burden, but when you remove the discussion post, you have to implement another submission. So it's a little bit of a give and take sometimes. I personally think the journal submissions are a little bit easier, a little bit more lax. I'm a little bit easier and a little bit lax in terms of grading because some of the things are going to be your personal opinion. But having said that, this week you are going to want to make sure that you do a little bit of research as it applies to the APA Code of Ethics. And again, bring in some information such as that article that I just showed you. Please don't everybody use the same exact thing. Go out, find an article that addresses an ethical consideration as it applies to one of the general principles. And essentially what you're going to talk about this week is picking one of the 5. And you are going to go a little bit more in depth in terms of what are the main ideas or key components of this principle. Why was this ethics code established? And then certainly you're going to talk about the professional actions, describe the professional steps a counselor should take to fulfill the ethics code and related to identified principle. And so again, you're going to expand on one of the 5. Okay, so just to clarify again, expand on one of the 5 here. You're going to submit a 2 to 3 page paper. Make sure that you have appropriate APA formatting and references to support your argument in here. This should not be a huge, big deal, gang, okay? I want to stress that a 2-page paper for students at this level should be just a few hours to complete. So if you start with the APA Code of Ethics that you all have access to, if you find 1 or 2 articles that talks about integrity or justice or fidelity and responsibility, for example, why this is important, integrate some of the ideas that you just read about in addition to maybe a little bit of research, you're going to find that this submission is really, really easy to complete. So that is the first step that you want to take this week toward completion. The second assignment rather, is to complete a worksheet that is going to give you an overview of the important elements that we would usually go through in terms of doing an intake. So this is not really you thinking about what should be on an intake or questions that are going to address per se, but the general concepts or the general criterias or the categories, if you will, of things that we might have on an intake form. And there is a PDF template that you're going to download where you'll talk about things such as the presenting problem, the background information, clinical formulation, etc. So the elements of the section in terms of the presenting problem are things along the line of what types of information would be important in gathering during a clinical intake. Now, I want you to think in terms of a client who might present with depression, for example. When a client comes in and talks to me about depression, people come in and say, well, how are you today? Or what are you feeling? What is coming up for you? Why are you here? Well, I'm depressed. Okay, depressed is a lot of different things, right? Depressed is a state of being. It is not an actual feeling. So I want to maybe gather some thoughts, some feelings from this person. What does this person's depression look like as opposed to the other 5 people that I saw today that have depression? These are some of the things that you want to think about in terms of doing an intake, of course, but in terms of doing this assignment, be thinking about this information. Now, again, you're going to put 2, maybe 3 sentences for each one of these sections. And as I mentioned, if you read through this case illustration about Stan, I always called him Sam, it will help you to kind of give it an idea of some of the things that you would want to know and some of the things that you would want to have at your fingertips if you're developing a treatment plan. So keep that in mind. Go through this case study. It will help you get on track for success with the development of your submission this week. Importance of the information in this section. Why do we need this information? How might it be important ethically speaking? How might it be important in developing an appropriate treatment plan? How might it be important in terms of research. If we're going to provide a diagnosis, why are these key information, or why is this key information important in developing an appropriate diagnosis, and so on. Okay, gang? So 2 to 3 sentences in each section. You should validate your arguments. And I want to stress 2 or 3 sentences does not mean 4 or 5 words times 2 sentences. A well thought out 2 or 3 sentences is really what I'm looking for here, so that you demonstrate that you have a good idea of what each one of these sections means, why it's important, how do ethics apply, etc. And again, find an article or 2 that might talk about things related to depression or anxiety. You got to have maybe a case in mind that you're thinking about. Someone presents with anxiety. What are some of the important things that we would want to address and talk about during that intake interview? So I hope this helped you to get on track this week in terms of creating and developing some solid submissions this week. Again, no discussion posts doesn't mean slack off and put everything off until Sunday. No discussion post should give you an opportunity to get things done earlier this week. Instead of rushing to complete your discussion post on Thursday, maybe you do the journal submission this week and have that off your plate before you even hit the weekend. If you have a chance to work ahead, start getting a jump start on next week, that's even better. And if you are behind, as things are a little bit lighter this week, absolutely buckle down, get caught up so you're on top of things, and then start to work ahead. Remember, we never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So if you're proactive and you're working ahead, if one of the life challenges that hits you, that by the way hit 3 or 4 students every single week, it will be of little impact on you, and you'll certainly just continue to move forward in the program toward completing your goals. So I hope this information helped you to be successful. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a fantastic week, and I look forward to reading your submissions.